Good afternoon. Welcome to the Ofsted SDA Church. And this afternoon we have the Health Ministry Department under the direction of Nell Thomas, Dr. Nell Thomas, who's the director, giving a talk, giving a presentation on COVID vaccination. And I see a lot of the member of the Health Ministry here attending. My name is Daniel Tambunan. There are many of our members here sitting from the Health Ministry Department. This afternoon we have our speaker, which is Dr. Vincent Hsu, who is the Director of Infection Control at the Advent Health Hospital wide. And he is actually an infectious disease specialist by his specialty. He actually graduated from Loma Linda University. And he did also his residency in California in Oregon, before he did his infectious disease specialty residency in California. So we're very fortunate to have Dr. Vincent Hsu to join us to talk about this exciting topic, which is vaccination. And he is actually one of the sought-after guru about vaccinations. Before we get started, we'd like to bow our heads and ask for the Lord's guidance as we start the program. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for everything that you've done for us. Thank you for this wonderful Sabbath afternoon. We know that you are in control and in every aspect of our lives. Lord, this pandemic has affected a lot of us indirectly or directly in this members, in this family, in this church members, and Lord, even the community. Help us to realize that you're in control even in the midst of this pandemic. And we're glad that you are a God of power and a God of love. We ask thee to be with us as we open this meeting and help us to receive the blessings. We ask all this thing in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Dr. Vincent Hsu to come up. So the program he'll be giving us a talk, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask any questions and answers. If you have questions, please go to my right side, your left side. There is a mic. It's going to be in the middle. And then you can come up to the mic and ask questions to Dr. Hsu. And if you are in the distant learning at the YouTube or Facebook, please send questions, and we'll be glad to relay the questions through to Dr. Hsu. Dr. Hsu, thank you so much for coming this afternoon, and we welcome you.
Well, thank you, Dan. And good afternoon to all of you. Thanks for being here. I'll be honest, normally when I give presentations, it's usually to groups of physicians, and not necessarily to our church members or the public, although I've given, media interviews and so forth. So this is something that's a little bit new for me, so please bear with me. But I think we're going to have a lot of, I just want you to let this sink in. And, this is something that we've never gone through. 2020, who could have thought? What a year for all of us. It's just been an extraordinary, and not necessarily in a good sense, an extraordinarily difficult year for many of us, for all of us, really. And we're hoping to have some normality this year, something that will say, I want to get back to what we're usually, to our normal lives. And that is really what we want to try to do. So today I'm going to focus mostly on discussions about vaccination. But before I do that, I just kind of wanted to take a trip down and just kind of bring, kind of summarize where we've been for the past year. It's been over a year now since this pandemic has really impacted us, and just wanted to give you a quick summary. And before I do, just obviously, you wonder why this happens. And I don't know why now. All I can say is that we do know God is going to continue to be with us. Jeremiah 20:11, I know the plans I have for you, they're plans for good, not evil, and to give you a future and a hope. And we are going to continue down that path, and we are going to see better times ahead. But when this pandemic started in China, it was really hard to say how this was going to affect us. And it's been lots of surprises. And I think the first thing that really kind of caught us off guard was, when this thing started, when we started seeing cases in the United States, there was, unfortunately, a lack of preparedness on parts. And it was, you could talk about the healthcare systems, the public health preparedness, the testing, the personal protective equipment, we call that PPE. And, and that was a really, really tough time. There were no good therapies available. And even now, we still are struggling to have really great therapies, but they're much better than what we've had before. And the mortality rate was really quite high. We didn't know much about how this disease was transmitted. We knew that most people had fever, cough, shortness of breath, but man, we started noticing lots of other symptoms. I can't smell, I can't taste, I'm having unexplained diarrhea. I mean, and then the biggest kicker was there was a significant number of people who had no symptoms at all. I mean, this is a pandemic's dream, if you have to talk about that. I mean, to have these weird, unusual symptoms coming up. And we think about it, man, it was, it's been really over a year, I mean, it really hit us in the U.S. in March. And it seems like, does it seem like a year? It seems much longer than that. It seems like it's been 5 years for many of us. And so March, now it's April 2, and we have, in March, things, basketball games started getting canceled, Disney World, started closing, lockdown, school, spring break lasted, pretty much, for the rest of the year for the kids, or distant learning. And so it's just been a significant adjustment. Travel's been canceled, cruise ships, all these things, it has really been tough, but we have learned and we have moved ahead. We have, made a lot of progress. Now, currently, unfortunately, we've had in the United States 550,000 deaths so far from the pandemic, and that's unfortunately going to continue to rise. We've seen 3 waves right now. We saw an initial small wave in April and May that kind of went back down. And then in the summer here in Florida, we saw a nice summer surge, and that kind of went back down. And then, of course, November, December, and the peak of January, we really saw a significant number of cases. I mean, at that time, there were 2,000 to 3,000 deaths a day in the United States. And the good news is that we have seen, that number go down. But you may be aware that in many parts of the United States, as well as in Florida, we're starting to see that leveling off and those cases start rising again. We've learned that social distancing, that's probably the term of the year, social distancing, mask wearing, really are effective. And we know that. We know the science is very clear that social distancing, staying, good ventilations, those are all big differences. And wearing that mask to prevent those aerosols, those droplets from you spreading to others, and it can also protect you, if you don't have it, from getting it from other people. And that's one thing that we've really learned as well. Another thing that, unfortunately, if you had asked me if Dr. Shu could predict what could have happened or would have happened, I wouldn't have thought this would have been such a big deal. But much of the disinformation or politicization of this virus has really just been something that I wouldn't have been able to predict. And, we live here in the U.S. It's a free country. you can certainly choose what you want to believe. We're certainly not, we're certainly, this shouldn't be, but this shouldn't be a political game. I mean, this should be based on science. And we understand that lawmakers, that politicians have to make decisions, and sometimes we as scientists don't always agree with that. But we also have to take into account that what we want to try to do is to get policies and practices that we know are going to save lives. And that's what we want to do. And so here we are, April 2021. Gone through a lot. And now, and of course, I'm going to focus mostly on vaccines. And one more thing before I talk about vaccines is, I wanted to just, one thing about coronavirus and COVID-19 is that the nature of many viruses, including COVID-19, is that it's just in its nature to mutate and to change. And so you've heard, lately in the news, we've been hearing a lot about mutations. The UK variant, the B117, South Africa B1351, Brazil, and there's homegrown variants as well, New York, California. I don't like it when they name it for geographic region. It's in a way it kind of ostracizes people from there, UK, but that's the way it is, and that's just the nature of the virus. And unfortunately, these mutations do occur, and they do render our vaccines or therapies, can be resistant, or they just don't have that neutralization effect that they do for the wild-type virus. And so that is another area that we're going to have to keep ahead of all the time. And I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you have about that. But that's just something we're going to have to continue to follow and try to keep ahead of it as much as possible, one step at a time. But who knows what's going to happen? And people always say, well, are we going to need boosters? Are we going to need to have vaccines on a regular basis? And the answer is, I don't know. I think that the answer will probably be yes, for several reasons. But we're just going to have to see what happens. Now, pandemics are, of course, not a new thing in the history of the world. I mean, there's been pandemics, and you may have heard about the 13th, 14th century, the Black Death, that seemed to have, a quarter of the population of Europe died from plague. And then, of course, most recently, the big pandemics that we have seen in modern history, 1918, the influenza pandemic. And so it's been 100 years. And so this puts us in a situation now where, we have another pandemic, and the way we get through this pandemic is really clearly a lot different than the way that you used to get through a pandemic 100 years ago. There was nothing much you could do 100 years ago. There was no vaccine. I mean, there was mask wearing, but their science wasn't really there. I mean, it really wasn't, it really wasn't a true scientific approach or public health approach to getting through the pandemic in the same way that we're doing it now. And of course, the big thing that we have now that they didn't have back then are vaccines. So this, I completely understand everyone here in this room, and those of you who are watching online, the concerns, the fears, wow, I mean, in a year you have this vaccine, and you want everyone to take this vaccine, and I have no idea if it's going to be, if it's safe, or it's effective, or it could cause cancer, or it could cause birth defects. I mean, there's just a lot of questions going through your mind because there just isn't. We've never done this, ever, in the history of mankind, is to try to get through a pandemic without going through natural infection, and now we have a vaccine out there and asking everyone to take it. So I completely understand that there could be concern. And it is my job, or you could say my responsibility, and I believe it's my mission to tell you what we know about vaccines, and why I think that this is something that the vast, vast, vast majority of you should take. because I do believe that this is a way to help us get out of the pandemic quicker, and we all want to see that normality come back. The more we delay, the longer it's going to take for us to get into a more normal way of life. But again, understand that it is something that that is just very unusual. Now, so pandemics are not new. Vaccines are also not new. Of course, we are all familiar with vaccines given to us as children, adult vaccines, influenza vaccines. The difference, of course, with the vaccines that we have nowadays is that it takes years and years to get these in development, and we've had years of experience with that, with our vaccines for COVID-19. And currently, you may be aware that there are now 3 types of vaccines that have what we call emergency use authorization. They're not fully approved, but they have been authorized by the FDA for us to be given them. There are 2 mRNA vaccines, one of them Mrna, one of them Pfizer, and the other being the Janssen vaccine, which is a subsidiary of Johnson & Johnson. So you hear about them being used interchangeably, Johnson & Johnson, J&J, and Janssen. So we have these vaccines. But these are, I will be the first to say, yes, we've never developed vaccines with this rapidity. And so there are questions about that, and the questions are, well, is it too fast? Is it something that is, because it's developed too fast, is it unsafe? And so we're going to go through this and just focus on this right now. I think the first thing that I would say, why was it developed so fast? Well, the answer is we are in the middle of a public health crisis, a worldwide public health crisis. And if there's one, I know there's a lot of, there's been a lot of bad news with the pandemic, but one thing that really was great, it was that it brought everyone together to try to work together to fight this pandemic. You have governments, you've got public health agencies, you've got pharmaceutical vaccine developments, you've got the people, everyone really, our goal is not to fight each other or country versus country. This is really mankind versus COVID-19. And it really did bring out the best in us, where that we were able to accelerate, put the money into this. Again, the administrations, we've got the Biden administration, Trump administration, everyone has been putting in just tons of effort to get this thing going for vaccine development. So that is one reason why we were able to get vaccines so quickly. Is everyone put their resources together, to develop this. Now, the other reason why it was really quick, another reason why it was very quick in getting vaccines development was because there was a guarantee or a push by the governments to say, look, we want you to, again, be as quick as possible in getting vaccines. We don't want you to shortcut any safety measures. So I want to make that very clear. There was no shortcut of safety measures. When we do the trials, there's these phases of trials. There's phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and they are incrementally phases that have to deal with, first of all, is it safe to give healthy volunteers just to see how they're going to react? And then you also want to test, does it generate antibodies? And then phase 3, what they try to do is to say, let's compare those that got vaccinated versus those that didn't get vaccinated, and compare the rates of COVID between the two. And it needs to have a large trial, because you have thousands and thousands, 30, 40,000 people enrolled, because because the numbers that you have to be able to measure the difference, and even though COVID is a pandemic and there's a lot of infections, to really identify the difference between the two, you're going to have enough volunteers out there to do it. Now, the place that, so they did not shortcut the safety and the efficacy trials. What they did, though, is normally most manufacturers aren't going to be producing millions and millions of doses of vials until they finish the phase 3 trials and say, okay, we know it's safe, we know it's effective, let's go ahead and start making that. Because making the vaccines takes a lot of time, takes resources. And so what was done to kind of move things, to compress the time period, was that as they were working on these trials to make sure they were safe and effective, many of the companies said, we're going to go, and this was the US government kind of pushing them forward, says, we'd like you to just go ahead and make millions of doses as quickly as possible, of these. And of course, most manufacturers are going to say, well, we're not going to do this under normal circumstances, because if it's a flop, we've invested in this and it doesn't work, then you've got millions of doses that are already made and we can't use it. So it is a risk, but then there's this coverage from the government that says, okay, look, if it flops, we will help compensate you. I don't know all those details, but there was some sort of guarantee to say, look, we can assure you that we will cover you for losses if it didn't work. Now, the good news is that the first vaccines that came out, mRNAs, the Moderna and Pfizer's, were a resounding success in terms of safety as well as efficacy, how effective they were. So they didn't have to throw away these doses. But they already had them. So when the phase 3 trials came out, boom, the FDA can look at that and we can go ahead and start getting those vaccines out there. So that's really one reason why while we were able to get vaccines. And normally it's a multi-year step. So the first thing I want to say is that for vaccines, the fact that it was done quickly did not mean that there were shortcuts in terms of safety. And I want to make that very clear, that there were risks in manufacturing these vaccines before it was approved and before all the studies came out. But it did turn out that at least for these three vaccines, the trials have been largely very successful in their clinical trials. Now, there are going to be some who say, well, it's new. We don't know what the long-term effects of these vaccines could be. And, honestly, I have nothing to say to that. If you want to wait for 5 or 10 years before you do that and really get that, that's going to be your call. So far, we have not seen any significant evidence about its issues of safety. Now, again, let me share with you, we've had vaccines for years and years. There is no such thing as a 100% efficacious vaccine that has absolutely no side effects, right? How many of you know of a vaccine that does that? The answer is none. There's none. So yes, it is true that there are risks of getting vaccines. It's always been that way. And I think I would like to ask all of you to just consider, yes, there are risks, but we get vaccines. We've got vaccines as a child, and yes, there have been, a good example has been polio vaccine. One in millions. In the old days well, not the old days, but a few years ago, we would give oral polio vaccine to children, and it was a live attenuated virus, meaning it was a live virus. It didn't cause polio, but in a very, very small number, 1 in millions, it would actually revert to in some children, it actually revert to the strain where it actually caused polio. So it was one of these things where there were unfortunate events in which some children, very, very small numbers, actually got polio by getting the polio vaccine. Now, we don't give oral anymore in the US because even though it was a very, very effective vaccine, the number of polio cases were so small now that it's just not worth it. So we now give an injectable polio vaccine. So, there are side effects. There are people who have severe allergies and they develop anaphylaxis. They have trouble breathing or their blood pressure drops. And, many of them do very well because we can give them medications to kind of treat the anaphylaxis and get them out of that. So side effects do occur. They are, the serious side effects are extremely, extremely rare. And so for our mRNA vaccines, yes, there have been reports of anaphylaxis. They are currently, I think the Mrna, was 2.7 out of 1 million doses of anaphylaxis. Pfizer was a little bit more, it was like 11 out of 1 million altogether. It was around 4 or 5 per million doses of anaphylaxis. And that is just part of the cost of doing business. But again, let's compare the risk and the benefits. If you were to get COVID, what are the effects? Well, we've seen the effects. We've seen hundreds of thousands of deaths from this. We've seen many more of them being hospitalized, being put on ventilators. This is not the forum to talk about all the clinical manifestations of COVID-19, but, as an infectious disease doctor, I have seen it. I have seen my share of very, very sick patients. And I personally have known people, these are people I know from church, who have gotten sick with it, who have been hospitalized and have died from this. It's a serious issue. And I know all of you probably here know someone who's had COVID and maybe someone who's had very serious events and effects from this. So everything that we do in life is a risk and benefit. When you drive the car to come here to church, there's a risk. It's really, really small, but there's benefits for driving your vehicle. And so when it comes to weighing safety in terms of vaccines, versus the cost of getting infected, how do you weigh that? And I think for the vast majority, and I can't say it for everybody, and everyone has to make their own decision, I think the real issue is the benefits of getting vaccines are well worth the potential risks that do occur. But again, I don't want to minimize the fact that yes, there are adverse events. I want all of you to understand that. Now, most of the side effects are going to be very mild. They're going to be a sore arm, and a good number have reported. I've been, especially after the second dose for the mRNA, I've had some chills, fever. I had that. I had a 24-hour flu-like symptoms. I didn't feel that great. I didn't go to work, because I was feeling under the weather. But I guess from my fact and from the way I felt about it, and maybe many of you, it's your immune system is really working. So and that's fine. To me, that's acceptable. For most of you, this should be absolutely acceptable to have that. And again, a few may have a little bit more serious events, but it really should just go away after 24 to 48 hours or so. So that's really, a discussion on effects. Now, why? We have heard other people tell me, even some doctors say, my risk of getting COVID or my risk of developing serious complications is really small. I'm young, I'm healthy. My chances of survival are much greater than 99.99% or something like that. And they're probably correct. If you look at that, many people are going to be fine with, they're going to get through COVID. And we do know the vast majority of people survive and do well. Of course, when you're dealing with a pandemic, there's going to be a significant number that don't do so well, as we have seen. But a lot of people are going to say, well, I'd just rather go ahead and get infection. And here's why I think that should not be, to me, that's just not something that holds as much water as you might think. Yes, it's true the chances of you doing well if you were to get natural COVID is probably going to be pretty high for many of you. But the problem is we don't know if it's going to be, you're still taking chances. And we have seen in our institution and many other places, there have been very healthy young people who have gotten COVID and have gotten really sick from that. So number one, I mean, it's Russian roulette, perhaps, and yes, I mean, it may be 1 in 1,000, but still, why would you want to take that chance? But perhaps even the more significant issue from a public health issue is that, look, if you just let yourself get infected, and even if you don't know you're infected, or even if you do, why would you want to knowingly say, I choose to get infected and potentially transmit that to other people? This is why things spread. This is why pandemics are pandemics. This is why outbreaks go around, is because there are people who are infected and it's transmitted to other people. So, we are really trying very hard to get in, everyone's mind the importance of, vaccination is not just for you, it's for others. And so let me talk about that just a little bit more here. So when you get vaccinated, there's a couple of reasons, to get vaccinated, and I've talked about, well, let me back up here. The first reason that many of us want to get vaccinated is to protect yourself. And that's been well demonstrated in the clinical trials that have been out there, is that if you get vaccinated, your chances of getting COVID-19 is much lower than if you didn't get it. The trials for Moderna and Pfizer have been at 94–95% efficacy. The trials for Johnson & Johnson, not quite as high, but we're talking about the high 60s or so from all infections. But perhaps the more important thing is that for all of these vaccines, and we're looking at AstraZeneca, which I'm sure they're going to be applying for an authorization from the FDA, and then there's Novavax, and there's others coming up. What they have found is, yes, I mean, it may not be 95%, may not be as good as the mRNA vaccines, but the most important thing is that there's efficacy from severe disease and hospitalizations. I mean, that's really the most important thing is, yes, I mean, it is true. I would love to get a vaccine that was close to 100%, but even if I didn't get one that was close to 100%, I want to make sure that it keeps me from being in the hospital and potentially, having to have a breathing tube, into my, into my trachea and lungs, and so that's really an important issue as well. So all the three vaccines are just extraordinarily good at preventing severe disease, and we're talking about 90%, and so that's really important as well. Now, people are going to say, well, is it true that it may protect me against severe disease, but will the vaccine also prevent me from possibly replicating and transmitting to other people? And we don't have a lot of data on this quite yet. I mean, we are getting bits and pieces of that yes, if you are to get the vaccine, not only does it protect you from getting disease, it also can reduce, at least significantly, your ability for that virus to replicate in your body and reduce the risk that it transmits to other people. So again, it's not just for you. Getting the vaccine, we believe, and there is more evidence coming out there, can make a difference in you being able to not transmit that disease to other people. And that is really a great thing. And and the whole thing about pandemic is not just your own health, it's health of other people. We're social beings. We want to be together and close to each other. But and that's why masks, even though I understand it can be a very divisive issue, during a pandemic, I think the best of us really want to try to do what we can, not just protect ourselves, but to protect other people and to prevent spreading it to others. So that is really an important issue. And if we are able to get vaccinated, if we're able to protect ourselves, protect others, guess what? The more of us that do that, the better it is for society. And then the quicker we'll be able to get to a more normal life. And you look at the countries out there that have done a tremendous job of keeping COVID from spreading. And I recognize the U.S. is not New Zealand, the U.S. is not Taiwan, and we're not an island nation, like many other countries. So I don't want to necessarily say that, well, we could have done what they did, but life has been really largely normal for those countries. And so we have to understand that the more virus that's being transmitted, the less normal things are. Doesn't matter even what the regulations are, what the policies are to keep things open. People are not going to want to do business as usual when there's a lot of virus spreading around. So the more of us that get the vaccine, the less the likelihood that we are going to be spreading it to others, and then the quicker we are to get back to normal. So just to, as an example, the Centers for Disease Control, I spent 3 years training at the Centers for Disease Control, doing, I don't know if I expected to deal with this in my career, but I did sign up for this because this is the type of thing that I did train for at CDC. But the CDC did come out a few weeks ago saying, well, they want guidance for vaccinated people. And the good news that CDC had said is if you're vaccinated and you have groups of people that are vaccinated, small groups at homes, you can visit like you normally do. You don't have to wear masks. You don't have to social distance. And think about all the people who haven't seen their grandkids face to face for such a long time, relatives, friends, get-togethers, dinners, whatever. Easter is tomorrow. To be able to get together with your family and loved ones and not have to wear masks, not have social distance, that's really great news. But that is guidance for vaccinated people. And then just yesterday, the CDC had come out with some more guidance and saying, if you're vaccinated, you can now you can travel. You do need to wear your mask in public, but they now have given, they feel that it is overall safe for vaccinated people to travel. And again, we want to get back to normal. So another reason why vaccination, I think, is going to be so important. And here we are right now. The current stats, we've given 100 million people in the United States have now received at least one dose. And that's about 30% of the population. That's really, we are very fortunate that we have accelerated vaccine delivery, and we're getting close to that. But we still have a lot of work to do. But and right now in Florida, of course, as you may have heard, the governor has said that as of Monday, every adult is now eligible to receive vaccine. So you can go make your appointments at any of the pharmacies, Publix, CVS. You can go to Orange County Convention Center, and there's the FEMA site at Valencia. There's many places you can get that. And of course, initially it's going to be tough to get a vaccine because there'll be a lot of demand. But eventually, in the next few weeks and months, we are going to get probably more vaccines than the demand. And this is the time now to start saying, look, when we start getting a surplus of vaccines, we want to make sure that everybody that can get the vaccine willingly wants to get the vaccine. That is just extremely important. And again, my goal, my job is to be able to help you make an informed decision. We don't want to force anybody to get a vaccine. We don't want to, this shouldn't be something that, drag you to, jab you with the needle because of this. No, we want you to do it because you believe it's the right thing to do and you believe it's going to benefit not just you, but society. So, that's really where we are. There's probably a lot of questions you may have about this. We want to do this for, again, for ourselves, but also for our families, for society. I know there's probably some things I would like to say that I've missed. But what I'd like to do now is in this last half hour or so is to be able to take questions from you that you may have. If there's anything that I missed that you would like me to explain further, I'm happy to do that. I know there's just a lot of things that we could talk about this, but right now, as far as what we have to do to get out of this pandemic, it's really to continue wearing our masks, continue social distancing, especially in public. Even if you're vaccinated, that's what we need to do right now. We're trying to work on how we're going to be able to determine who's vaccinated, who's not, and what they have to do in terms of social distancing. But right now, we really want to do that. Continue social distancing, continue wearing our mask in public, and get those vaccines as quickly as possible. Oh yeah, one more thing before I open up for questions is that when do we think that we're going to get to that point of what we call herd immunity? You've heard that term many times, herd immunity. And herd immunity is really a concept that we have learned from vaccination programs in the past and from natural infections. It basically refers to the amount of people in a community in which you have a sufficient number that are vaccinated or naturally infected. We would prefer you get vaccinated rather than natural infection for what we've talked about before, but a combination of that, whereby if you are then if there's someone with the disease that you're exposed to, that this amount of immunity prevents other outbreaks from occurring or transmission to other people. I must say, I'm sorry, I don't have slides. I would love to have shown you some slides, but you think about just a group of people, if 85, and we're talking about 75 to 85%, 100 people, if 75 or 85% at least have immunity, some immunity against COVID-19, that is generally considered sufficient enough whereby it does not then spread to other parts of society. That number is enough to prevent significant infections from occurring in outbreaks for those that are susceptible. So that's our goal. When do we think we're going to get there? Hard to say. President Biden had said he would love to be able to get everyone an opportunity to get vaccinated by early May. I think a lot of my colleagues, a lot of the public health experts suggest perhaps sometime in summer. So we're talking about summer, late summer perhaps, in which we can get that number. And of course the other issue is children. So right now the vaccines are approved for adults. And if you're 16 and older, you can get Pfizer. If you're 18 and older, you can get the other vaccines, the Mrna, the J&J. Children are going to have to get vaccinated as well if we really want to get that herd immunity up as well. And so we have just seen data from Pfizer suggesting that 12 to 15-year-olds are really well protected with the vaccine. That just came out earlier this week. It's not published yet, but we've heard that from a press release from the company. So far, very good news on the children front. We would love to start getting children, at least the older children, vaccinated sometime in the late summer, fall, and probably the younger children. The experts are suggesting perhaps maybe later 2021 or early 22 that we can really start getting them vaccinated as well. But it's a continual journey, and it is true that we do know that with natural infection, over time, immunity does wane. That is something that occurs with many infections. It is certainly not expected that you're going to have lifelong immunity. And even with vaccines, there has been some evidence suggesting that vaccination actually is a little bit better than natural immunity in some cases. The nice thing about vaccination is that everyone is given a standard dose, and there's been trials run. And so we expect that overall, I know that everyone's different. Some people have immunocompromised, weakened immune systems, others are healthy. It is true that there's a lot of variability in how long you're going to have that immunity last. But overall, having a standardized dose of vaccine, we can pretty much try to measure that in that level of immunity that I think is going to result in less variability compared to getting natural infection. There are some people who have natural infection, they have no symptoms, but their immunity just basically goes away after not too long at all, several weeks to months. Others have significant infections, and they may have immunity that lasts for 8 months or more. So it's really variable. Again, the question had come up, do we think that there is going to need to have a vaccine booster? And I do think that's going to be the case because either, for two reasons. Either your natural immunity for vaccines or for natural infection do wane over time. I hope it doesn't. I hope it's a long time. Or there may be changes in variants that occur that may render the current vaccine to be somewhat ineffective. And a good example would be South Africa. The UK strain, fortunately, has demonstrated to be very susceptible to the vaccine, which is really good news. But let's say if South Africa, for whatever, if the B1351 strain were to become dominant, in the United States, we do know that the effect of neutralization is much less with the current vaccines. It still may be effective, but maybe less. Then there may need to be a way to try to develop a vaccine specific for that. It's not unlike flu, because every year flu changes, and there's these effects called shift and drift. And we have to get a slightly different flu vaccine every year for most years. So it may be that way for COVID as well. I can tell you one thing for sure: there will not be a combined. People ask, well, if we have a COVID vaccine yearly, can I get a combined COVID flu vaccine? And the answer is right now, there's not any plans to do that right now, just because it's very new. We don't know when we're going to get the COVID, how often it's going to be, and the way it's manufactured is very different from flu right now. So. You're probably going to need to get one or both. But anyway, I'm all speculating. It's hard. My crystal ball has been wrong many times, and so we'll have to continue to keep you updated and informed as we go along. So that is where we are right now. And again, I want to thank you for letting me share some thoughts about vaccine. Again, I know that God is going to continue to lead us through this pandemic. All I can say is continue doing what you're doing. And if I can answer any questions about vaccination, I'm happy to do that.
If anyone have any questions, you can come up to the mic and ask Dr. Hsu any questions. I do have a question. Thank you very much for a lovely talk, Dr. Hsu. We appreciate very much. My question is that, I have a young one at home. He's 18. He's actually present here. And, he probably won't get a severe infection, in terms compared to an 65 and older. So what would you say to my young one, why he needs a vaccine? We got some young ones also on my left side here in the back who's actually going to be qualified to get vaccinations this coming Monday.
Why get vaccines? Number one, we know the vaccines work. It will protect you from getting disease, severe disease especially. Now, again, it is true that it is it's very likely that your son will be fine, even if you were to get COVID. But so even though it's effective, you may say, well, why get it? Well, first of all, there are young people who get severe COVID. So that's one thing. The odds are such that why take that risk? And we have seen, we just don't know who's going to get really severely ill, and so that's one reason to do that. The other reason, again, is for society. It's not just for you, it's to protect you. By protecting you against getting COVID, there's very strong evidence that you will be unlikely to transmit it or transmit it at a much lower level to others. And so there's a duty, an obligation, I think, for us as people to, as human beings, to do what we can to help others. This is a time of war. And of course, it's not war against another country. This is a time of war against the virus. All of us really should be thinking about each other and doing what we can as society as a people to prevent others from getting infected. And so that would be what I would say. It's not just for you and your risk as a person. It's for everyone to do this as a duty to help others.
I have talked to some people and they don't want to be vaccinated because they said that they don't want their DNA or RNA to be affected.
They don't want their
They don't want their DNA to be affected.
DNA to be affected. Yeah, so I didn't talk about mRNA vaccines specifically. You know, there's always a concern. Well, you know, you're giving me a DNA sequence that causes my cells to produce the spike protein. So the answer to that is, you know, yes, this is we have never had mRNA vaccines before. But mRNA technology is not new. It has been used in cancer chemotherapy. We have had years and years of experience with mRNA vaccines. And there is no evidence whatsoever that it is going to cause alterations in DNA. It does program, the RNA does program the cell to produce these spike proteins, but it does not get into the nucleus. So when you're dealing with replication, you're replicating the same cells that are unaffected by this. It does not cause alterations in replications. It does not cause cancer. There's no evidence that it causes cancer. So the answer really is mRNA vaccines, while vaccination is new, it's effective, it is safe. The mRNA technology has not been demonstrated at all to cause cancer, to cause, you know, and people have said, well, yes, fetal abnormalities, cancer. None of that is valid based on the fact that we know a lot about mRNA technology. So, but that is a significant issue, and it's just a matter of education. And I suppose if someone says, I refuse to get the mRNA vaccines, well, you've got the other vaccines. You've got the J&J, you've got the adenovirus, the protein-based. That is much more traditional, if that's what you want to do then. So, I mean, again, there's no problem in getting an mRNA vaccine, but there are other vaccines available as well.
After I have been vaccinated, are you sure that I will not going to be killed?
Says you've been vaccinated. Is that what you told me? Okay.
After I've been vaccinated, I'm so sure that I will not be killed?
After you're vaccinated, you're sure that you will not be killed?
Yes.
Well, let's put it this way. After you're vaccinated, I can feel very assured that your likelihood of getting ill from the coronavirus is going to go way, way, way down. Let's put it, I feel very comfortable saying that. That your risk of getting COVID is going to go down to very, very low because you're vaccinated.
Next question. After the parents got vaccinated, do the children go back to school?
Yeah. So, one thing that we've learned about children in school is actually very good, is that, when the schools put in the safety protocols, when they have asked them to wear masks, and especially now that teachers are able to get vaccinated, we have seen very low rates of transmission in schools. So the general approach now for schools now is to go back in person. In fact, the CDC has said you don't even have to be 6 feet apart. You can be 3 feet apart now in younger children. Children do not tend to spread virus as efficiently as adults. So when you wear your masks, so the answer to your question about can we go back to school in person, the general approach is going to be yes. And I expect that by next school year, we're going to have pretty much schools that are face-to-face. Now, we may still have to wear masks for a little while until the children can get vaccinated, but still, being in person generally is very safe. And I'll tell you, I kept my kids out of school until February. I look at the data very well. They were virtual learning They didn't like virtual learning nearly as much. But after looking at the data, after my wife and I got vaccinated, and looking at the data, I said, I think my kids, the benefits of being in school outweigh the risk, and it's a good decision, and I'm very comfortable with that decision.
Thank you. Last question. You mentioned Biden.
Am I certain about what? I'm sorry.
You mentioned Biden.
You mentioned Biden.
I mentioned Biden, yes.
Yes. We know already in the whole world that lots of Filipino nurses sent to UK and other places, especially here in America and Canada. You know that?
Oh, I value our Filipino nurses. They have been such a wonderful resource in the hospitals.
I understand that this Anika, not Pfizer and Moderna, and what's the name of that medical? And AstraZeneca.
Yes.
They are not accepted here in United States. It's already in here. But the old people refuse to have a vaccinated of that. And then President Biden sent that to Canada. Instead, my question is this. Instead of sending that AstraZeneca to Canada, why is it that they did not send to Philippines that we need the vaccine in the Philippines?
So thank you for your question. I've been talking mostly about the U.S. And there is, for us to get out of the pandemic, there's going to need to be global vaccination, right? And I have friends, I think in the Philippines and other places, who are not able to get U.S., AstraZeneca or other vaccines. They may have to get vaccines from other countries, China, the Sinovac, for example, and others. I don't know as much about the safety and efficacy of that. I certainly don't think that, as far as I know, that there is any significant problems with those. And I would say that for most people around the world, these vaccines, the benefits of getting vaccine are probably greater than the potential risks. But yes, but the United States has a responsibility to work with governments throughout the world to try to get vaccines distributed globally. We cannot ignore the rest of the world. And while, yes, I understand we want to vaccinate our citizens first, we've got to work with other governments, other manufacturers, other global companies to try to get vaccines throughout the world. And that should really be the next step. So your point is absolutely well taken.
We'd like to thank you for your visit, Doctor. We are blessed that you are here. This is my question. I am in the valley of my decision, but I'd like to ask you, why is it that a renowned virologist by the name of Shukarit Bhakdi is against vaccination?
What is his name again?
Shukarit Bhakdi.
Okay.
He's a German Thailand doctor.
So the answer is I don't know. I don't know who this person is. I do know that there are some scientists, I'll just put in quotes, or doctors who may be against vaccinations. Even during this pandemic, you have heard many different points of view from different doctors, and some of them I completely disagree with. So I can't speak specifically to why he does not recommend vaccinations. Again, many of the hesitant issues. Well, there was a doctor who just sent me an email a few days ago, a physician, who says, I don't want to get the vaccine because I'm healthy and I am not going to, my likelihood of getting ill is very low. Just like what Dr. Tambudin's question was about his son. We've got some doctors who just don't want to get it, and they feel that there's not enough data or enough time. Well, again, this is not normal times. We are in a pandemic. And I would say the vast majority of scientists, doctors, public health experts all agree that now is the time to get vaccinated. So people can have their own opinions. I've outlined to you why I think it's important, and some may disagree. That's up to them. But just because a doctor says that he doesn't want to get it doesn't make that, of course, the right thing.
Another question. Why is it that the CDC just said it's an emergency use of the vaccine? Why do they use the word emergency?
The reason we use the word emergency, and it's actually the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, who actually gives that authorization, not the CDC. They're both branches, they're both divisions or departments under the Department of Health and Human Services. The reason they use emergency use authorization is because there isn't the preponderance of data or time that normally they would do for vaccine or medication reviews that would allow them to have full authority. So it's emergency because we are in an emergency. And let's just say, it's not going to happen, but let's just say one of the vaccines that was released was found to have a side effect that was considered to be unacceptable. The FDA could say, we think that the risks of getting the vaccine are now greater, and this type of side effect is unacceptable. We're going to recall that, and that would be appropriate for them to do. We have to remember this. Manufacturers, governments, for us to say a vaccine is safe, it takes a lot of guts to do that, because all it takes is one bad side effect to just completely ruin it for everyone. We want to have the trust of the population, of our people. We want them to take it because they believe it's safe and effective, and we want to do everything we can to make sure that it is. Because one small wrong move could really spell trouble, and it could cause a lot of trust issues. And we're already dealing with trust issues with many of our with many aspects of society, African Americans, other minorities are distrustful already of government to begin with, right? So we have to be super careful. And that's why they have an emergency use authorization, is that, yes, we believe right now the data suggests that it's safe and effective to use, but we're going to look at everything very carefully. All side effects are going to be recorded. There is a mechanism to anything that you think as a side effect, you can call, you can enter, talk to your doctor, and get some sort of report, because we want to know if there's truly a bad reaction or adverse reaction. We want to hear about that, and there's mechanisms to put that in place. So I feel very confident that we've got these mechanisms in place, and at the first sign of trouble, if there is going to be trouble, I hope there's not, the FDA would act on that and reverse it.
One more, Doctor. Since there are 3 variants, I think, from Africa.
There are more variants than that, but those three are kind of the big ones. But there are many variants, unfortunately, out there.
My question is, the current vaccination does not cover with those variants.
The UK variant, the one that's the most dominant in the United States and Florida, is actually very well covered by the vaccine. So from that standpoint, I feel very comfortable that our vaccines that we have, all 3 of them work well against the UK variant, which is the predominant strain right now in Florida and in the US. So now the concern would be if there's another variant that starts developing and becoming more widespread, that might be an issue right now. But for now, I am feeling pretty good. But we have to keep track of that.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Shu, I have a question to you. Okay. I've been working here in the States for 36 years. The first flu shot, because I never believed in flu shots in my life. So I decided one day in 2005, I think, to get it so I don't have to wear mask for 4 months. because I'm a nurse in the hospital.
Uh-huh.
I had a very bad side effect. I was so dizzy when I woke up the following morning. I could not walk. I had to call my neighbors, the nurses in Advent Health also, which was down Florida Hospital, to bring me to the emergency room because I thought I would die from the effect. So from then on, I've never gotten any flu shot anymore. And God is so good, I've never had flu in my life. So what will I do? That's why it scares me to get it.
Well, you know, I've heard these stories before. It's really hard to say for an individual whether or not. I mean, I understand the story you're telling me. You know, you haven't gotten a flu vaccine, and then you got a flu vaccine, then you got very ill the day after, and you haven't gotten it since. I don't know if that is coincidence, or you probably feel it was due to the flu vaccine. So I understand your hesitancy. And you know, there are some people who just, you know, who feel the same way, and they are concerned about an adverse event. You know, it's going to be up to you to make that decision. I would say that the flu vaccine is very different from the COVID vaccine. You have had other vaccines, I presume, you know, childhood vaccines and other issues. So, you know, and there are adult vaccines. There are pneumonia vaccines that you should be getting. I certainly wouldn't ask you to use your one experience with the flu vaccine and generalize that to the COVID vaccine. This is very different. And again, it's up to you to weigh that risk. We don't want anybody to have, you know, we don't want anyone to have severe side effects, but the chances that you're going to do very well from the vaccine are very high. And that's what I could say for you.
Okay, hang on a second. For the sake of time, we're going to actually conclude our time, but we're going to actually take one last question, and then we'll conclude our meeting.
Doctor, by definition, medical dictionary says that a vaccine is either dead, attenuated, or weakened. Which of this definition is correct?
Yeah, so vaccines, you know, and I didn't go over all of this in detail, but vaccines can be live attenuated, and there are certain vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella is a live vaccine, but it's been modified so it doesn't cause disease. The oral polio vaccine is also. Right now, the vaccines for COVID-19, the mRNA vaccines, the J&J, those are not live vaccines at all. Those are protein molecules, the mRNA vaccines, as well as the J&J. They work differently, but they are not alive at all. They will not cause COVID-19,
Yes.
and they will not cause disease.
Excuse me, would you say it's dead?
I would say, yeah, it was never alive to begin with. Let's just
Good.
put it that way.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hsu, very much for coming over. And please give a round of applause to Dr. Hsu. And we hope that you'll have an opportunity to come back and give us a follow-up talk. From the health ministry and from the whole church, we are appreciative of your volunteering your time. I know your time is very
Thank you for having me.
This concludes our meeting this afternoon. Don't forget to stay for our next, which is given by the youth department.